This is a AMG GT, so it's an aluminum chassis car. Very much like the Corvette, it is rear transaxle. So basically we have a gearbox in the back, we have a torque tube in the middle, we have an engine in the front. Really, really great design. We actually have more weight over the rear axle than the front axle in this machine. Engine is the standard 4-liter V8, pretty small V8 with 2 turbos, and they're on the hot side of the engine, or it's a hot V as they call it. So the turbos sit in the V, the intake comes around the outside. It's kind of a backwards design, but it really allows those turbos to spool up really quick and get the power delivery right to that transmission in the back really, really quickly. Now, compared to a standard street car GT, this car actually makes a lot less horsepower, which is something kind of silly that we don't often hear, but this car turned right now for this event, we actually turned it to what we call party mode, and is only making about 470 horsepower. So in race trim, we're actually in the high 3s. So we're actually enjoying the car with a little extra oomph, but really the car compared to the street cars, which make up to 700 horsepower, is pretty tame right now in this configuration. But it makes its time up in other ways. It's honestly, I describe this car as a big spec Miata. Has great brakes, big AP brakes all the way around with a Motorsport ABS system that is to die for. Adjustable bias, adjustable everything you ever needed. The brakes on this car are absolutely phenomenal. It does have some aero add-on. As you can see, we have a splitter that goes back to basically the center line of the front wheels. Some duct work going on. We have a gurney flap and a hood scoop to kind of get some of that high pressure air out there and make sure that engine stays cool. And in the back we have a wing and a very small diffuser, kind of based on the street car, but it's not a significant diffuser. Now, one of the things that really turns this thing into a race car is the gearbox. So rather than using any semi-autos or any normal gearbox, AMG has ditched all of that stuff for a proper racing gearbox. So this has a Hewland sequential gearbox with a quick change diff in it. So we can really fine tune this car. We can change preload on the diff, really change the dynamic of the car on decel and accel. And then we can also do a lot of things where, you know, the flat shifts in the sequential gearbox are just amazing. The way it holds the chassis together, the way it sort of delivers that responsiveness when you hit your foot on the right pedal, it really gives you what you expect from the car, which is pretty amazing. Now, a couple other add-ons. Obviously, the car has a lot of safety features. You know, it has a cage, a steel cage that's bolted to the aluminum chassis. It's kind of silly sounding because this is an aluminum chassis, so the cage is actually steel and it's bolted into the car. And then obviously all the safety equipment that goes with the car with a full safety cell seat, all that sort of stuff. So I think, with this car, a lot of the big tuning tools we typically use, a lot of rear sway bar adjustments. We do a lot of rake changes, changing the angle of the car. Those are probably the biggest two. In the front wheel drive world, it was always toe. Toe was our big thing. We'd play with the rear toe, play with the rear camber, just try to get that rear of that car to dance around. But yeah, I would say the biggest one is going to be rake and bar changes for this car. We do a lot of preload changes, stuff of that nature. So basically, when we're tuning this car, we try to get the front as hooked up as we possibly can, and then we tune the rear to hang on to the front. And that typically gives us a pretty good car that saves its tires. The other thing that we tune is obviously 2 or 4 hour races. We need to make sure we're kind to our tires. So what may be fast for 1, 2, 3 laps is not necessarily fast for 40 laps. And we need to take that into consideration, make sure we're not putting too much pressure on those tires and we're not going to hurt them. While some of the things are really tunable and they really encourage you to tune them, we found that there's really sort of some white lines that have been placed in where you can't go outside of them. Obviously all the race teams are bending them as much as possible, that's what racing is, but there is a lot of stuff that's locked down on this car that we absolutely can't even touch. For instance, the power levels are preset in this ECU. They will plug in, Imsa will plug in and see what our power levels are. We cannot do anything about that. We can't tweak it, we can't change it, we can't change anything at all. So it really sticks to the basics of making a car go around the track fast, which is keeping your tires happy, making sure your suspension setup's proper, really dialing in your strategy for that race and making sure you're getting the most out of the car and the tires and not necessarily finding ways to tweak the engine or the gearbox or things like that. These cars are not that far behind a GT3 car in pace. The biggest place is going to be weight and aero. So, if I were to be able to do that, really kind of rewrite the rulebook, first thing I would do is probably more suspension adjustments. Things where the mounts can actually move. I think that's where we find ourselves limited. This uses a lot of street car parts. Almost all the actual suspension hard parts are street car parts, and we're just not allowed to do things like anti-dive and anti-squat and the things that can really kind of give you that edge sometimes in professional racing. All right, guys, if you want to find out more about this AMG or more about the race team or FCP Euro as a company, head over to fcpeuro.com, or if you want to know just about the race team, go to race.fcpeuro.com. We have a lot of content out there. We have videos about TCR racing, about AMGs. We give a lot of in-depth information about behind the scenes racing, how we set up the cars, what we're thinking about. So if you want to know more, head over. We'd be happy to share it with you guys.
Support brands that support grassroots motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.